This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On Saturday, Taiwan will go to the polls to elect its president and parliament. Polls currently suggest that the most likely winner will be Lai Ching-te and his Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP. The DPP are generally more pro-independence than the opposition Kuomintang, and Lai is perhaps the most pro-independence candidate in Taiwan's history, having once described himself as a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence. Given that China officially considers Taiwan as part of its territory, it should come as no surprise that the CCP really don't like Lai, and have described him as a destroyer of peace. Unsurprisingly, this has sparked some anxiety, not just in Taiwan, but also in the rest of the world, about how China might react if Lai does indeed win. China was so angry when the DPP's first president, Tsai Ing-wen, was elected in 2016 that they entirely severed diplomatic ties, and during his annual New Year's Eve address, President Xi Jinping ominously warned that Taiwan would, quote, surely be reunified with China. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Taiwan's upcoming election, how China might react, and whether this could be the beginning of yet another global conflict. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. To understand Taiwan's politics, you need to understand a bit of context. From 1927 until 1949, China was intermittently in a state of civil war, fought between the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, and the Kuomintang government, or KMT. For most of this time, Taiwan was actually a Japanese territory, but it was returned to China in 1945. In 1949, the CCP defeated the KMT in mainland China and established the People's Republic of China on the mainland. The KMT fled to Taiwan, where they continued the Republic of China. Both the CCP and KMT claimed to be the rightful rulers of all of China, despite the fact that the KMT only had effective jurisdiction over Taiwan, and still do today. Now, you might assume, given their competing territorial claims, that the KMT and the CCP really wouldn't get along. However, because they both broadly agree on the One China principle, since Taiwan became a democracy in the 90s, the KMT have been the more pro-China party, and their main rival, the DPP, have been the more pro-independence party. The KMT are generally more popular amongst older, more rural voters in the east, while the DPP are generally more popular with younger, more urban voters in the west and around Taipei in the north. At the upcoming election, for instance, the DPP's China policy involves increasing defence spending and expanding conscription to deter a Chinese invasion. The DPP have also said they don't need to explicitly declare independence, because Taiwan is already de facto independent. On the other hand, the KMT want to cut spending and improve diplomatic ties with Beijing instead, and have, accordingly, framed the election as a choice between war and peace. Now, at first glance, you might assume that this election would be a shoo-in for the DPP, given that China and the idea of unification is increasingly unpopular in Taiwan. Less than 12% of Taiwanese voters support reunification, roughly 30% want an explicit declaration of independence, and over 60% disapprove of the CCP. This is for a variety of reasons, including China's slowing economy, the CCP's crackdown in Hong Kong, the fact that Taiwanese voters are increasingly unlikely to identify as Chinese, and the widening ideological gap between Taiwan's progressive democracy and China's autocracy. Unfortunately for the DPP, though, this isn't how things have panned out, and polling suggests that Lai only has a narrow 5-point lead over the KMT's candidate, Ho Yo-hee. This is in part because the KMT have softened on China. Ho is from the less pro-China faction of his party, and has explicitly disavowed the one country, two systems model in the aftermath of Hong Kong. Some voters also think that the DPP have been too provocative with China, which is why support for the status quo has increased over the past few years at the expense of pro-independence sentiment. But it's also because the DPP don't have a great domestic record, and economic development is currently voters' top priority, even ahead of cross-strait relations with China. Taiwan is struggling with high inflation, stagnant wages, and an acute housing crisis, which all disproportionately affect young voters who usually make up the DPP base. Furthermore, the race has been disrupted by a third party, the Taiwan People's Party, or TPP, led by Ko In-je. Ko is a far more exciting politician than either the DPP or KMT candidates, who are both essentially establishment figures. He's compared cross-strait relations to prostate cancer and tried to chart a middle way by saying he'd increase defence spending while simultaneously pursuing better diplomatic relations with Beijing. While he's unlikely to win, given he's polling at 24% and his support is waning, the TPP will probably prevent the DPP from winning a parliamentary majority at the legislative elections, which will make governing difficult. Nonetheless, while they're clearly not doing as well as they might have liked, the DPP are on track to win at least the presidential election. So if this happens and Taiwan ends up with its most pro-independence president ever, what should we expect from the CCP? Well, a significant military escalation feels unlikely, given that cross-strait relations are at least in a better state than they were a year or so ago, when China reacted angrily to an unplanned visit to Taipei from US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Perhaps the most likely outcome is some sort of show of force, maybe flying a few more planes into Taiwan's airspace or more sanctions on DPP officials, but nothing Taiwan hasn't seen before. However, we shouldn't rule out something more dramatic. If the DPP do indeed win, it might be interpreted by Beijing as conclusive proof that reunification by peaceful means isn't ever going to happen. This might push the CCP to take more aggressive action, given that Taiwan's main protector, the US, is currently preoccupied with Ukraine, the Middle East, and an upcoming presidential election. And taking Taiwan is only going to become more difficult as Taiwan's defense spending increases and pro-China sentiment on the island continues to wane. In this case, the CCP would still be unlikely to stage an outright invasion, given the military and political risks involved, but rather some sort of maritime blockade to prevent or at least limit Taiwan trading with the rest of the world. Taiwan is particularly vulnerable to a blockade because its economy relies heavily on international trade, and 98% of its energy is imported. To be clear, a blockade wouldn't necessarily involve China actually targeting merchant ships around Taiwan, which would amount to an act of war. Rather, China just needs to do enough to deter ships from transiting to Taiwan, maybe by performing military exercises around the island, or just encircling it. This would be terrible news for Taiwan's economy, present a strategic dilemma for both Taiwan and the US, and possibly precede a full-scale invasion. As we step into 2024, many of us are contemplating our New Year's resolutions, always looking to improve ourselves and learn more about the world around us. And while our content is always a good starting point, a lot of stuff we talk about can seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive into analytics and detailed data. But luckily there's a fun and easy way to learn more, which also doesn't cost thousands of dollars or take years and years of schooling. That's because Brilliant is the best way to learn maths, data science, and computer science interactively. And the good thing is, it doesn't take long to learn either. These complex topics are broken down into small but accessible chunks, designed around your busy schedule. Even just a few minutes a day can help you with accumulating new knowledge over time in a fun and engaging way. As time goes on, you'll also get used to that empowering feeling of learning too, because Brilliant isn't just about memorization and lectures. Brilliant teaches you by doing, using active learning techniques to teach you the principles behind otherwise quite complex subjects, and ensuring you actually understand what's going on. So whether you want to brush up on your basic math skills, improve your employment prospects, or just have another New Year's resolution for 2024, you can check out everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days by going to brilliant.org/TLDR. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support.